Right, got a lot to get through today, so apologies in advance for what's probably going to be confusing and wordy. Anyway, this is HeartBreaker with graphs. Yay. Now, for the purpose of this, I'm not going to tell anyone anyway that is the absolute best way to run HeartBreaker. From all the playtesting and data I've been collecting, I've basically figured out that it's pretty damn clear from the off that different setups excel in very different scenarios. So I have created this. I'm aware it's a monstrosity. And yes, completely aware it looks very messy. Don't worry, I have others for a more direct comparison. Right, let's start from the top. The blue line that you can see poking up from the large majority of the graph, that's Kingbreaker with Perfect Spotter. The green line chasing it and finally taking over at the right side of the x-axis is Kingbreaker with the HeartBreaker chest. The orange line hugging the bottom of the mass is Sleipnir with the Perfect Frenzy buff active, as well as the Perfect Spotter chest. Though please keep in mind that I am bad at managing graphs, and what is showing on the Sleipnir graph is happening in half the time of everything else. Essentially, you could fit what I've done for Sleipnir in there twice, while everything else would still happen at the same time. The yellow step up with the plateaus is the DPS rate of rock and roll, which did quite surprise me. So that's accounting all pellets hitting one shot across the board, which is why it looks like a step, because you're getting that many stacks for it to go up per shot. And finally at the bottom, those two raggedy lines is rock and roll as the slightly lower one, and then ACS 12 with flatline as the slightly higher one. Again, apologies, I know this is probably a lot and most people probably don't care about shiny lines. Anyway, everything is accurate to about 1.6% of true values, minus taken into account the RNG of crits versus non-crits, which is why on that graph they're very up and down. Now, to show this as an average will maybe highlight the difference between them, though this does really simplify it a bit. But then at the same time it does sort of show the true values, especially when comparing overall DPS rates between the different setups. So I have also created this. So again, curving blue line is Kingbreaker and closer. The green line underneath that eventually overtakes is Kingbreaker and HeartBreaker chest. The orange line that shoots up and then plateaus throughout is Sleipnir, which I've managed to actually get it showing correctly this time. The small yellow curve that plateaus is the DPS rate of rock and roll, and the near identical lines at the bottom is rock and roll versus the ACS 12 flatline, with the ACS 12 with flatline is the one that is just ever so slightly above the other. The ACS 12 versus rock and roll is only accounting for pellet damage, which is why it is so much lower. So don't get too disheartened or think that I'm trying to pull your leg by saying, oh look, they're terrible. It's clearly not, because the DPS rate, which takes there's many pellets that typically hit, which is between 6 and 8 being the max, roughly, depending on your range, is obviously a lot higher than the actual pellet for pellet count. So the bottom ones are just the pellet for pellet count, whereas the one that shows the DPS rate, which is a lot higher, is probably the one you should be more focused for. Now, I was going to show the DPS rate of an ACS 12 with flatline, however, my friend that did the shotgun tests for me had to shoot off. Really wanted to get this video out, and judging by the fact that the pellet count by shot was not, there was like barely any difference between them, although it's better, I can pretty much guarantee that the DPS rate of ACS 12 with flatline, you're going to see pretty much the exact same thing. It'll be near enough identical, just slightly above. The only discrepancy being is rock and roll has 30 rounds in a mag, so you will have a more steady incline with a slight drop and then a steady incline again, whereas ACS 12 with flatline will have a steeper incline, a larger drop or a quicker drop because you are only firing 20 rounds rather than 30, although the downtime will be the exact same, and then yet again another steep incline on the overall DPS rate. So this little graph, yes, more graph, setting the tone for this video early. This one shows a direct comparison between Perfect Spotter versus HeartBreaker chest. One thing to note, we only use Kingbreaker 2 build stacks for this direct comparison, starting from 0 on a non-pulse target, so all shots were within varying crit builds against the head of the target. As I'm hoping you can see, for a good 70% of this graph, Spotter is outperforming the HeartBreaker chest. The DPS rate is near double, and the TTK is an average of 1.4 seconds lower. Lower the TTK, the better. TTK is time to kill. It is only at roughly 68 to 74 stacks on the HeartBreaker chest that chest really shines. Obviously, all of this is counteracted by using the ACS 12, however, taking into account crit rates, headshot rates, you would need to hit a minimum of 60 stacks with your ACS 12 by the time Kingbreaker can land 3 hits on a pulse target or 4 hits on a non-pulse target, assuming the first shot applies the pulse. Essentially, there are a lot of conditional variables for HeartBreaker, and I will state this now. From the testing I've done, there is no wrong way to play HeartBreaker. I even have a HeartBreaker skill build and it slaps, although if you are going to do this, you must run the close to chest piece with skill damage, skill haste. Yeah. Now, this graph is poorly done, I am sorry, though hopefully to demonstrate how this should look, this orange line should end here, and then this part between the 2 arrows should fill in the remainder. To hopefully put this into perspective, you are doing approximately 1.2 million damage a shot at about 1400 RPM, which is juicy. I mainly use the Sleipnir for burning down bosses in the raid, chungers, hunters in countdown, etc, etc. Although it is also just generally quite fun just to sort of just aim at something and go brrr, and then watch them again, well, disappear. Now, final comparison, ACS 12 with flatline versus the ACS 12 named rock and roll. The blue line that is lower is rock and roll. The orange line, which is slightly above, is the ACS 12. The overall damage difference between them is not a lot. However, in terms of when you start to do DPS, you've got to imagine that essentially the overall damage compiling is very different. Each arrow here denotes the actual shot, so the lines beforehand are the individual pellets, meaning that you want to add up the damage up to the arrow, there is your shot, add up the damage up to the arrow, there is your shot. Very, very confusing, I am aware. Now, once you do this, you end up with a graph that looks pretty ominous, also pretty simple. However, just because I was only using rock and roll, I didn't want to use the flatline one because the person testing, the ACS damage had to disappear, but just for the rock and roll, this is essentially the DPS, which is pretty damn juicy. Can't really lie, it is comparable to Kingbreaker itself, if just ever so slightly below. However, the overall climb that it does throughout its DPS, which is very, very quick, obviously it's going to be crit dependent. There are a few steps that are not as steep or high as others, but overall the DPS rate of the ACS 12 was really, really good. One that did catch me by surprise, which I didn't want to put into the video because it's going to be a separate video, but Tsunami. Trust me, Tsunami. That was an interesting take. Weapons that I have found that absolutely flunk with HeartBreaker, Pestilence. Even using 2-piece is not worth it. You get more out of just using high end, simply just because of how Pestilence works. I mean, the list of what works and what doesn't work is kind of pointless because HeartBreaker is kind of a jack of all trades kind of setup. You can make it into a skill build, you can make it into a full tank build and still do damage, you can make it into a red build and still be pretty tanky. It is a very, very useful and universal setup. I just wanted to do this video in essence to highlight the amount of variety that you could do with different pieces to get different damages as well as outputs. One thing that I can say from the off is, particularly in missions or open world, Spotter outperforms HeartBreaker Chest. HeartBreaker Chest excels in Countdown due to population density, as well as hunters are pretty tanky, so having yourself to be quite tanky as well as deal some pretty decent damage is really, really nice. In essence, all of it really comes down to you. The larger point of this video is, if someone's telling you the HeartBreaker Chest is absolutely required for a HeartBreaker build, they are wrong. 9 times out of 10 the Spotter Chest is better, does more, has higher sustain, higher DPS and lower time to kill. The only really times it doesn't really perform as well is in Countdown, where the HeartBreaker Chest you have a greater opportunity and chances to get and maintain maximum stacks. If you are perfectly capable of maintaining maximum stacks in the open world or in a mission, go for you. But for those of us that can't, myself included, Spotter is by far the better option. A lot of it really does come down to how you play, your setup, how you want to use it. For example, I am not using the ACS 12, I might have different results and maybe my opinion would change if I was using the ACS 12. However, I really do not like the run in and go boom 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 with a shotgun play style. It's not me. I'm very much more of a move around, take things out at preferably a decentish range and have higher burst DPS, sleep near, for those times where it really, really counts. Anyway, that probably does it for this video. Again, I am really sorry, it's been a lot of graphs, numbers, etc, etc, but I'm hoping maybe someone has learned something, maybe try out the Spotter Chest, and hopefully, if you're willing, spread this video around a bit so other people can learn, because I am seeing a hell of a lot of false info around HeartBreaker. Anyway, in the meantime, good luck, have fun, don't die. It's bad for the health.